If you find this show informative or funny, you should tell your friends, your family. You got fingers. You got fingers. You got fingers. You got fingers. Come on.
5 different shows.
5 different shows.
5 days a week.
5 days a week. 5 different topics. 5 different ready. You got fingers. You got fingers. You got fingers. Ow! You got fingers. Fingered by Randy and Jason.
So, Nirvana is probably my favorite band of all time. Maybe after Queen, or before Queen, depending on what era of my life I'm in, what
Probably,
day.
definitely most influential band,
Yeah,
I would say.
yeah. I mean, it's one of those things too that I totally take for granted. Like I remember when, like, the first time I heard "Smells Like Teen Spirit," heard like the little intro. I'm like, that is fucking brilliant.
Right.
I'm like 12 or something.
Yeah.
I'm like, that is brilliant. That's good. This is how music should always be. I'm glad people are finally doing it the way it should always be done.
Mm-hmm.
So arrogant. I thought that was going to be like a normal thing.
No, you got it. You got a bush. You got a puddle of mud. You got
Oh, God.
fucking a bunch of. The only bad thing about Nirvana is the legacy they left behind.
Yeah. No, that's what Everett True, who was the guy who covered Nirvana.
Yeah.
The legacy of Nirvana is just a fucking joke.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. I mean, Nirvana's music itself is, in my opinion, because of where they're coming from and the angle, there's not a bad Nirvana song. That was released by him. That acoustic shit that was just like trash on the same recording as a kid.
Yeah.
Fair, you know. But anyways, so at the time though, like in the early '90s, you had like your kids who liked punk rock and wanted punk rock to be a thing, and punk rock really never truly got its like day in the sun in the mainstream.
Yeah.
And so punk was breaking in the mainstream finally. But you still had these guys who like listened to Extreme and read Guitar Player magazines and Two Hand Tapped, and then you had this weird middle ground for the guys of Nirvana, the Generation X era, where like Eddie Van Halen and Aerosmith are bands that they bought at Walmart when they were kids, but it was also like the antithesis of the people they wanted to be and how they were coming at music. Like, you know, they were, it's very like metal, like a very metal kind of mindset. Whereas the grunge mindset, and I even hate using the term grunge because grunge is such a weird thing. Grunge is supposed to be this Seattle thing, but in actuality, Nirvana is not a Seattle band. They were an Olympia band. They were more like Bikini Kill.
Yeah.
They came out of
They're
a
Washington band.
Yeah. But I mean, well, yeah, they're Washington, but it's like intellectually completely two different like philosophies and everything.
Yeah.
You know, and like it comes feminism and stuff like that was way more prevalent in Olympia. Anyways, so you have this weird place that Cobain finds himself in by about 1994, where he's been ostracized by Olympia and all of those bands. They kind of like have turned their back on him to an extent.
Right.
And then he's this pop star, you know. They're playing, you know, My Best Friend's Girl by the Cars, which is a way of saying, yeah, I'm new wave now. I'm not punk rock anymore. It's over.
Yeah.
And they're playing arenas and stuff, you know. And so this day I find to be an interesting day for Nirvana because it was December 30th, 1993.
Okay.
At the Forum in Inglewood, California.
Inglewood.
And it's the day that Eddie Van Halen specifically visited Nirvana, which is strange.
That is very strange.
You know, it's very strange. And, you know, this is not far off from Cobain's suicide, by the way. This is like 3.5 months, maybe. So that show, Bobcat opened up for him. Bobcat opened up for Nirvana on the Euro tour a lot. Butthole Surfers and Choke Bore. It's a pretty regular Nirvana gig if you like listen to the bootleg for the time. Around 9 songs in, they play In Bloom. Now, In Bloom is important to this episode because this is kind of one of the moments that you see this historical moment of Eddie Van Halen having visited, kind of like coming out in the show.
Right.
But it's completely lost on the audience at the time. They have no idea. They played Jesus Doesn't Want Me for a Sunbeam, and they dedicated that to River Phoenix because he had just died.
Okay.
So a little bit of grounding here.
All right.
Young Indy. During the end of the show Destruction, Kurt used one of the Angel's arms. They had an angel on stage, like with the wings, like the cover of the Utero record. He used one of its arms and to play his guitar.
Nice.
And then he leaves the stage and comes back with a drill, kind of like Gallagher, which he drives into the guitar before picking it up and spinning it over his head. Mm-hmm. And then here's the other Eddie Van Halen part, I think. Chris Novoselic starts singing, "Girl, you really got me now." And it's a Kinks song, but obviously it's known because or known more in the 80s era because of Van Halen.
Right.
Which also and that was sandwiched together with Eruption, which was the two-hand tapping technique that a virtuoso guitar player can use. You know? So anyways, so let's go now before the show. That was the show. Now we got to go before. Back up.
Okay.
Backing up. And now this right here is this article is online and it's on like an Earthlink page, okay? And it's fucking like basically archived now. I first read this article, I believe, in BAM, which was a free magazine given out in the LA area around 1995.
Yeah.
So either Pat Smear tells the same story twice or it's the actual same article I read as a teenager. But so Pat says, "Can I tell you my Eddie Van Halen story? I actually met him. He was backstage at the final Nirvana concert at the Forum, which for me was like, oh my God, I'm playing on the same stage as Queen's Brian May. I was dying. Anyway, Eddie Van Halen comes backstage drunk out of his fucking mind, and he started begging Kurt to let him play with us. It was so disgusting. He was like, I'm all washed up. You're what's happening now. It was horrible. He was a horrible racist pig.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, it gets pretty sad. So it's pretty funny, though. At one point, Kurt takes out a Menon speed stick and starts putting on deodorant before the show. Mm-hmm. And Eddie wants to smell it. He wants to know what that brand smells like. I guess he's shopping for a new deodorant. Mm-hmm. That's my guess. I don't know why this happens. But he goes in to smell it. And Kurt takes the Menon speed stick and kind of rubs it all over his nose. Uh-huh. And he's drunk, so he doesn't realize it.
Yeah.
So he's walking around looking like he's been to the ultimate Coke party.
Right, yeah.
You know? And you have to remember, like, this is like their fucking hero, by the way.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Like, and there's this point, and I think it's actually in Everett's True Book, where they talk about the first Nirvana show, and this guy starts playing guitar and like soloing, like playing like Van Halen stuff or something.
Right.
And you could tell by Kurt's and Chris's like words, like they were really impressed by it. Uh-huh. But it's such like an off-putting thing, like that virtuoso thing.
Yeah.
It's like anti-punk rock. I mean, punk rock isn't about wearing a leather jacket and dyeing your hair purple or something and putting a mohawk. It's about anybody can fucking do this.
Yeah.
It's no one's special. No one's better. Everyone has something to say. Say it. You can do it. There you go. Well, the Eddie Van Halen virtuoso shit, and he's amazing, and I'm not trying to take anything from him on that front, but it's for every single person who likes to say that Kurt Cobain dumbed down guitar, fucking, I think Eddie Van Halen ostracized more people from it than anything.
Right, yeah. The cool thing about music at that time, the time when we grew up, is there wasn't that bravado to it. There wasn't like that performance element to it, to where like when you have people who are like playing, if anyone's ever been a musician before, and you have someone who's like playing like souls in front of you, like there's almost like this like certain like degree, like you have to stand and watch this person because they're performing. Yeah. And it was never like that. I mean, with the people we played around when we were kids, I don't think music was like that at the time.
No, I mean, yeah, no. What was cool about it, I would say, was you did have a choice still. Like at that particular time, or just a little bit before that, you could be like, I want to be a virtuoso, and there was an avenue in music you could take, or you could be like, you know what, I just want to write really fucking good chords progressions with really good hooks.
Yeah.
And you could potentially do that too. But that of course, the Eddie Van Halen stuff choked itself out to death.
Yeah.
And then you ended up with someone like Cobain that was a personality. I would even say an intellectual and an artist. But once he offs himself, there's nothing to fill that. There's no leading like thinker for the movement. Like, you know, Chris Cornell and those guys, they weren't really saying very much.
Yeah.
You know?
At that time, I mean, I think that was the opportunity when like Smash Mouth really took the mantle and just ran with it.
Yeah. It was when Shrek 2 came out that I just knew.
They're like, music's back.
Anyways, so Eddie's walking around with Men in Speed Stick all over his fucking nose, like he's doing coke.
Fucking Men in Speed Stick.
And Eddie wants to come on stage, and he wants to play Eruption. Now, Eruption, like I said, it's that 2-hand tapping technique, and it's pretty fucking amazing. I'm not taking anything from it.
Right.
But if we could play the clip, and if you know anything about Nirvana, try to imagine this in a Nirvana show, it could not be more out of place.
All right, here we go.
So
load up on guns.
Yeah,
it's good. Yeah,
no, it does that for a really long time, and I remember before I could play guitar, and I remember after I could play guitar.
Right.
Once I could play guitar, I could hear the movements, and I could hear like sort of what the suggested chord changes are to the movements of what he's playing. Before that,
right,
it was just boring as fuck.
Yeah,
like
I mean,
just,
even go a little bit beyond that, like before you know how to play guitar, and there's still like a little bit of magic to it.
Yeah,
you're like, oh, but after you play guitar and then realize the actual utility of that particular technique,
yeah,
it's a fucking parlor trick.
Well, it does not give anything to songwriting for the most part.
No, I mean, it literally is like a parlor trick.
But so anyways, they tell Eddie he can't play Eruption. No Eruption. And so Pat runs into Chris backstage. Pat hasn't actually walked in the room yet. And he's all, I told Chris Novoselic, I think we should let him play with us. But he said no because we'd never get him off stage.
Right.
When I walked up to Eddie, you know, because he was fucking drunk. Yeah. When I walked up to Eddie, he was talking to Chris. I just saw the back of his head, so I didn't know who he was. And Chris goes, "Oh, Eddie, you haven't met Pat. He's our new guitar player."
Uh-huh.
Eddie turns around and sees me, but he doesn't say hello or anything.
Right.
He just says, "Oh, no, not a dark one."
I say, what?
Oh, no, not a dark one. Yeah.
What?
Yeah, so imagine meeting one of your childhood heroes, and he's just like going to knock you for being dark or too dark for his taste. Pat says, at first I thought he was kidding, but he kept asking me, "What are you? Are you a Raji or something? Are you Mexican?"
Holy shit.
And then he kept saying to Kurt, "Come on, let me play the Mexican's guitar." And he's all, I was horrified. So, yeah, fucking
hell.
So it's kind of like, fuck it, Eddie Van Halen and his boring ass 2-hand tapping, you know?
Yeah, right? Fuck that guy.
By the way, Pat Smear is African American and Cherokee on his mother's side, and his father's a German immigrant, so he's not even Mexican at all.
Right.
So Kurt says, "No, you can't play with us. We don't have any extra guitars."
Nah, it's okay. I brought my own.
Van Halen doesn't grasp the obvious lie, and he points to Pat Smear. He's all, "Well, then let me play the Mexican's guitar." What is he? Is he Mexican? Is he black? And Kurt couldn't believe his ears. Eddie went into like this full like racist sort of like homophobe stuff, like banter, typical redneck kind of like shit.
Right.
And that's what Dave Markey said. Dave Markey's the director of 1991, The Year Punk Broke.
Right.
And he happened to be at the show.
Okay.
He's all, it was surreal. He's all, Kurt was furious. But he finally came up with a worthy verbal response. "Actually, you can jam. You can come on stage after our encore. Just go up there and solo by yourself." And And so and that was it. So, but really quickly, I pulled a clip from first of the studio version of the solo to In Bloom.
Okay.
And so, like, because I want to kind of juxtapose it against Eruption that you just heard.
Okay.
And Kurt's kind of famous for being like the anti-guitar solo player.
Right.
Which I would say is actually more akin to jazz, to a jazz take on guitar playing, where it's sort of it's sort of improv, but it's also, there's sort of a structure to it at the same time. So here is the solo to In Bloom by itself from Nirvana's Nevermind. So you could hear, like, when Kurt's playing, it sounds like fucking T-Rex is mating or something.
Yeah.
It's like it's a little bit trying to be, I think, like Joey Santiago from the Pixies.
Yeah.
And then obviously a little bit of what he had come up with on his own when they did Bleach and they were on Sub Pop. And it's completely the opposite style of Eruption. But on this night, the night of this show, when they played In Bloom, during the solo part, Kurt shredded.
And he played this next one?
This is the time that Kurt shredded the solo. So there you go. So it's really clear, like, during the show, to each other. I mean, no one else would get this. No one knows that Eddie Van Halen's backstage,
right? Yeah,
but they're just
it sounds like he's fucking around.
Yeah, just kind of like fucking mocking Eddie Van Halen, singing "Girl, You Really Got Me Now," and they're doing that, and he's probably walking around backstage with fucking men and speed stick all over his face. Yeah, lost, fucking thinking about fucking firing Sammy Hagar, trying to get fucking that loser from Extreme into Van Halen, trying to fire, what's his name? Dave? Is it Dave Anthony?
Dave Anthony,
yeah, trying to fire Dave Anthony, trying to get fucking his son in as bass player for Van Halen. I mean, it's just a complete fucking wreck.
You guys are a disaster, man.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's another part of the interview with Pat that I remember reading, and in it, Pat's all, I was fucking a drunk or an alcoholic or had too many to drink one time. Yeah, and he's just like he pretty much like forgives them. He's just like I've been an idiot before. So he doesn't like really hold it against him too much, but you could tell it fucking crushed him.
Yeah, how could it not? Like, especially if like you look up to that guy and he's part of the reason you probably aspire to do what you end up doing, then find out that even if he is drunk, he's fucking like an undercover fucking racist. Yeah, like full on racist. Right, he's kind of fucking pathetic. Like, yeah, that would fucking crush you.
Yeah, I mean, and that guy was kind of like, I remember as a kid, people were like, he's the new Hendrix.
Yeah, right.
That's like, Hendrix was a black guy, man. Like, but clearly you see your two-hand tapping as some sort of superiority thing. but I mean, it's Nirvana shows were always a fucking train wreck, like for the best, like for the better. Yeah. And like the best thing about Nirvana shows, like I never got to see them live. But the best, I watched hundreds of bootlegs. I mean, I have a huge collection. And the coolest part about Nirvana shows is it going to fucking fall apart? Right. And it'll fall apart a lot, and then they pull it back together, and that's like the magic of that band. But it's nice to know that the night that they met Eddie Van Halen, it was that fucking crazy still.
And that there's some documentation
that it was documented. Yeah. But so that is the story of the time that Eddie Van Halen visited Nirvana backstage in 1993 at the Forum in Inglewood.
And they found another use for deodorant.
Right. And as a kid, man, I used to freak out because he mentions Brian May.
Oh, yeah, right.
Because, like, it wasn't cool to like Queen when I was like that young. Like, it became cooler over time. Like, once Disney bought Queen or bought the Hollywood Records, had the record contract, and started putting it in the Mighty Ducks and shit movies and stuff like that.
Right, yeah.
It became really cool to like, but, you know, I remember that being really cool too. But anyways, that is the story.
If you have a question for Fingered by Randy and Jason, send questions or topic suggestions to fingeredpodcast@gmail.com. You can get Fingered by Randy and Jason 5 days a week on either iTunes, Google Play, or SoundCloud. And you can follow us on social media. Twitter, you can find us at Fingered Podcast, Facebook.com/Fingered Podcast. Make sure to use the hashtag #GetFingered. And have you got fingered by Randy and Jason? Leave an awesome 5-star review on iTunes or Google Play. Until the next time you get fingered.